So there was this new report from IQAir, which is this Swiss air quality organization, but they are. I mean, can you tell us what IQAir is and kind of, I guess, why their findings are so significant?
So their IQAir is a company that sells a range of products, one to measure air quality, but also filtration devices to improve air quality indoors and prevent exposure to air pollution. And so as part of that effort, in their business, I think they are interested in making sure there's awareness around the issue of air pollution. And so they have been creating these reports which harness data from both sort of traditional government sensors that are deployed around the world in various countries for monitoring air pollution, as well as the private low-cost sensors, they're often called. These are like purple air sensors that you can purchase online, or you can purchase one from IQAir and put it outside your house and then have a monitor of what air pollution is nearby your own location. And so these are often then connected to the internet, and the data can be grabbed by anyone. And that's what IQAir is doing, is sort of collecting all of this data and then analyzing that data into this report. And they work with government agencies around the world as well to obtain the data, which is not always easy to obtain directly from websites. And then sorry, go ahead.
No, just to clarify, so even though there's a profit incentive for them, this is governmental data, and we don't need to be skeptical.
Some is governmental data, but some are just from these sensors that people have purchased and put on at their home, and the data gets streamed to a website, and then that can be collected. So there is some need for skepticism around some of the, just in part because these sensors are not going to be curated or properly calibrated necessarily, and some will have various quality, and I'm not going to sort of disparage any particular company's devices, but skepticism is definitely required for especially individual sensors that you might go see on their website, like the IQAir is sort of posting all of the sensor data at in real time. And it's helpful to be able to see that, and because many of these devices do work reasonably well to give you a broad picture of what air pollution is like in any particular area. But if you try to focus in on one particular sensor, you may run into trouble for sure. And so in some cases, they are using data from one sensor to sort of describe what air pollution is in a particular location, and that can be problematic.
Okay, that's great context. I appreciate that. Because it wasn't necessarily immediately clear that it was a for-profit company in a lot of these articles about the findings. But it seems, though, that the findings can still be, they're still very much in keeping, I would say, from other reports that I have heard about declining air quality standards globally. I mean, as a professor of atmospheric science, what have the past few years been like in terms of global air quality? And if you could describe that within the context of the traditional standard, which is the WHO standard of measurement.
Right. So it's sort of two-sided problem where in many regions of the world, advances are being made because of regulations imposed on industry, and energy production and so on, that pollution has been decreasing. And that's certainly the case in the United States, North America, Europe, China, India. There are improvements to air quality in many of these regions, especially from pollution that was directly driven by human activities, so related to transportation, to driving your car, or energy production like coal-fired power plants. The regulations have been getting tighter and tighter, and so air pollution has actually been decreasing in many of these areas. The problem over the past few years has been wildfires, especially in North America, but also throughout the world. Both sometimes intentional burning, but also wildfires, especially in North America, have grown in frequency and severity. And in many places, this is actually wiping out the improvements that have been made through regulations that are tightening emissions from other sectors that we can control. And so in some ways things are improving and also getting worse at the same time. And there's this intersection with climate change because as the Earth is warming from increasing carbon dioxide, this is basically driving ecosystems to be more drought stressed more often and or for longer periods, priming them for when they do burn for more energetic and larger burns and longer burning seasons. And this is then increasing the amount of particulate pollution, but also other types of pollutants into the atmosphere in very large quantities in very short time periods. And so you end up getting these very extreme events of degraded air quality, like was experienced throughout the US and Canada, for example, this past year. And that event actually led to a lot of what was in the report. The findings of the report for where some of the regions had the worst air quality was often driven by these wildfires.
So yeah, if you could speak a bit about that, the effect that these wildfires, if over the summer, had on 2023 air quality levels in North America. We're here in Brooklyn. We all remember walking around wearing masks. It was a little bit different for us, which I know people in the western part of the United States, it's a little bit more quotidian. But for us, it was a scary event and something that I hadn't necessarily experienced yet. What were the results? What did the science show that these wildfires had on air quality in North America?
So it was, by any measure, an extreme event compared to the past 2 or 3 decades of monitoring of air pollution, especially on the East Coast. As you mentioned, the Western states are a little bit more used to, unfortunately, having to experience wildfire smoke inundating urban areas. And the statistics show that in the Western United States, in fact, the trend has been declining air pollution, but now in the past 10 years, that's actually flattened out and in some cases started to increase again. And that's being attributed to increased wildfire frequency and severity. It was a somewhat unique event that impacted the East Coast, that wildfire smoke can be transported and has been transported in years past all the way across from the Western United States or northern Canada into the East Coast. But the size and the intensity of the fire, so the area burned and the amount of material put into the atmosphere from the Canadian wildfires was factor 10 more than typical. And so that's partly why it was such an extreme event for this particular year. Wildfire smoke does propagate, every year from where the fires are, usually in the Mountain West, to different parts of the U.S. It's just that the levels tend to be lower and less discernible to us when we're out and about. But the extreme burning that happened in Canada this summer was obviously, you couldn't ignore it. The skies turned this bleak orange-gray during the daytime, and you could smell it. You could smell the smoke, and so you didn't need an air pollution monitor that worked very well to tell you that it was really dirty air. And so these, just to give you an example, the typical particulate matter concentration in New York City would be on the order of 10 to 20 micrograms per cubic meter, but there were several days in a row where it was 200 or above. So factors of 10 higher, and levels that just hadn't been seen in decades in these regions of the East Coast. In the 1970s and 60s and 50s, actually probably were often at those levels. And so that just shows you the dramatic improvements that have been made in regulating and improving air quality over time by enacting all of these different regulatory controls. We have actually made the air cleaner. It's just that with now this onset of more frequent and larger wildfires, some of that progress is being eroded.
And I mean, the root cause of these wildfires is obviously increase in heated climate, right? Climate change. The fact that
there's many factors, yeah.
Right.
So climate change is definitely one. It primes the system for more severe burning. It tends to have warmer temperatures, and then the fuels dry out faster, and
Right.
so they're just ready to burn. And but then there's, of course, human encroachment and changing fire suppression practices over time that have sort of all culminated to this period of just being in a situation ripe for large wildfires.
And is this, I know that there were massive wildfires in Europe as well. What were some of the effects that they experienced?
Yeah, it's, again, climate change is a global problem, and so are practices related to fire suppression and encroachment on ecosystems. There's also intentional burning that we could even talk about for the people of Brazil or Africa, where large-scale burning is done to clear land for agriculture, and that's equally a problem for exposure to particulate matter as well. Whereas wildfires are more not intentionally caused, or they're caused by a lightning strike, and then the system just erupts into fire, and they sort of can't be controlled or regulated. In Europe, so the fires in Greece, for example, were catastrophic, and that smoke has the same impact. No matter where it's produced, it's going to degrade air quality and be transported to downwind regions in Europe. And then those were all components of increasing in air pollution and degrading air quality that the IQAir report sort of alluded to, that there was actually air pollution was not really improving at a rate that we would like between the past year, 2022, and 2023, in part because of these wildfires that were happening, not just in North America, but really across Europe and Eurasia.